Uncle Ron and stuff. Today it's turning points and monuments. Monuments. Speak to that first. In the survey world, when they survey like a highway, along the highway somewhere, there's a concrete monument put up, and on the top it gives the survey information for that point, and it's called a monument, survey monument. Uh, anyway, uh, one of the Kurt Vonnegut books, he could get unstuck in time, and to me, monuments, I have what I call time monuments in my memory. They're significant sort of moments, and I think I consciously created a time monument there. And a good example of that is I was a lifeguard at a large pool one summer, and they had a real high chair that set up you could oversee the whole pool. There were several lifeguards on duty at one time, but the high chair you had a view of the diving area and the deeper water, and that's where you really were concentrating. Anyway, you would go up there for an hour and a half, I don't know. I have a time monument for that, and anytime I want, I can go back there and be in that chair on that bright sunny day, looking around. I can feel it, smell it. It's very, very vivid. So it's like a time monument. And I don't know if you have those sort of things. There are other really strong memories that I was Army training and had set up an ambush out in the mountains and woods. And my particular position, I had hunting experience, and I had found a nice sort of depression, but I could still see the area I was supposed to cover, and I covered myself up with leaves, and it began to rain, and it rained for hours, and I was laying there on the ground with my M16 covered up in leaves and just soaking cold wet, and I can time monument myself back there anytime I want and be right there. So it's a time monument. I don't know if everybody has those or not, but significant experiences. And I think at the time, I laid down a time monument. I thought, okay, well, I want to put a strong memory for this one in place. Turning points. Turning points. I don't know if people think about it that way. I think everybody has turning points. Uh, it's like Robert Frost, I think, is the poet who, he came to a woods and there was a turn to the left and there was a turn to the right on the path, and he picked one, and it was a turning point. You could go this way, or you could go that way, and the turning points that have occurred in my life, some of them, I guess, in the end, I had the decision, but I was presented with, or things occurred where everything could have been different after that had I this or that happened, or I had made this or that decision. And those are sort of interesting. I don't know if everybody has turning points, or they can think about them, remember them, or maybe they regret them, made the wrong decision. Maybe they regret, I don't know. Some of the turning points. Uh, when I was little, I got an electric train for Christmas, and it had a electric transformer. And I don't even remember the voltage it put out, but anyway, in Cub Scouts, I was supposed to make a telegraph system, and I did. And I used my transformer to power it, and electricity became a fascination for me because of that. And it was a turning point. My direction went off into the magic of electricity, and so I played with wires. And my father, he could be insightful. And so one Christmas, I got a complete electronic sort of kit that you could build things out of. And I built a radio out of the parts and made it a shortwave radio. And magic, listening to Radio Brazzaville at 3 o'clock in the morning on a piece of wire on headphones, and it was magic, and it led me into went to school electrical engineering. It was like thread, a turning point. I think that electronics kit was a turning point, and it impacted me. I don't know where I would be today. I don't know what I would be doing. That's the way it went. Was a turning point. Turning point. Um, I went to VMI, a military-based college, and the first year was really hard. I was not physically fit. I'd never been an athlete, and it required a lot of physicality to it, besides all the college course levels, which I wasn't prepared for either, because I was a small pond, big fish in a small pond in my high school, and it wasn't hard to excel. So I didn't have to do a lot of studying. Okay, you throw yourself in a college environment. Everybody there is bigger fish. They came from small ponds and big fish in a small pond. And I didn't know how to study, and I didn't know how to do the physical stuff, and it was really hard on me. And I got to a breaking point, and I called my father up and said, "I'm leaving. You got to come pick me up." And he was really understanding. He wasn't mad about it or anything like that. And I had borrowed the money to go to school. Wasn't anyway. He said, "Well, I tell you what. You call me again tomorrow. If you feel the same way, I'll come and get you." Well, in 24 hours, I changed my mind. Stuck with it. Never called him again. Graduated. Turning point. If he had come and got me when I requested him, entirely different route, entirely different life. Turning point. Since I was in VMI, I was scheduled to become an officer in the military. At that time, it was required. Uh, the Army came to the facility and gave the physicals when you were ready to actually start the commissioning process. And my father had had a series of heart attacks, and I was actually on leave, and I went home to see him while those physical exams took place at VMI. So I had to take a physical exam, and the closest place was in Roanoke, Virginia, where all the draftees w- went to get their physicals. So there I go. I'm in with all these draftees. There must have been 50 of them, 60 of them. And I go through, and my eyes are terrible. I have 2400 vision. And so when I got all done, somebody said, "Okay, you're 4F. You can't go in the military. Your eyes are so bad." So, okay. I tell you the truth, I was kind of relieved because I had originally planned on going in the Air Force. I knew I couldn't be a pilot, but I was an electrical engineer, and I could be a technical guy. And the Air Force was much more technical, or at least that was my impression at the time. So when they said, "No, you can't go in the Air Force," and I was relegated into the Army, and I really had no particular interest in the Army. They wound up putting me in artillery, which was different than infantry, and okay, I'll go along with it. Anyway, here I am in the draftee center, and I get all dressed and I'm ready to leave, and my name is called over the intercom system. I'm supposed to see Captain whatever, and I go there, and he says, "Well, I see on your record that you're, in your third year, fourth year of VMI, and it's a shame to waste all that military education and training and everything. So I'm going to waive you. I'm going to grant you a waiver so you can go in the army." And at the time, it's like, well, I didn't say it, but it's like, you don't really have to do me a favor here. It's okay. But anyway, he waived me, and so I did go in the U.S. Army. There was a turning point. If I had been waived, then I would have not done any military service, and life would have been different. As it turned out, I did go to El Paso, Texas for a year, and then I went to South Korea for a year. So it was an amazing experience. I mean, I don't know what I would have done hadn't I would have gotten the job, of course, but a turning point. Uh, there are various turning points, I think, in their lives where if you look at them, the road could have gone this way or that way. When I was in El Paso with the Army, um, I was had been assigned to a air defense unit, and we had these tracked missile systems. Okay, and the colonel heading that thing up had been in the Pentagon, and he had cherry picked who his officers are going to be. He actually really did. Every officer in his outfit at either West Point or VMI or the Citadel, or they were on top of their ROTC class at some university. So while I was there, they had a college at Fort Bliss, Texas, for officers, and the staff was predominantly VMI people. And so when they learned I was there and I was electrical engineering, they needed a mathematics teacher. So they called me over and said, "We want you on our staff." So I said, "Okay, but you're going to have to, the colonel, oh, we'll clear it with the colonel." No, colonel would not let me go. No. Now, had I been gotten on the staff there and been a teacher for the remaining period of military career, I'm sure things would have been different. I may have stayed in the Army. I don't even know. Same thing occurred when I was at VMI in my last year of school. The head of the electrical engineering department, he called me in and said, "I'd like you consider to be an associate professor for one more year here. You could teach." And I told him at the time I really appreciated the honor. I don't know why I was selected. There were a lot of really good. I wasn't a top double E or anything. He and I got along together, and I don't know. But anyway, I told him I couldn't do it. I'd already been there too long, and but turning point. Had I stayed there, and I was considering graduate school after bachelor's degree. I may have pursued a graduate degree had I stayed with him for one more year and had some teaching experience. I did have a teaching certificate in the state of Virginia, which was another turning point because my wife and I both interviewed after the military for teaching positions in a small town called Covington, Virginia. And we got accepted, as I remember, or I did, or she did. But Covington was a very small town, and the pay was hardly nothing. And we decided against it. It would have been a major move back with nowhere to nowhere. We wound up going back to our ancestral home after I got out of the military and went from there. But turning points. Turning points. There's a ton of them if you think about them. Things which have gone this way or that way. Um, um, my wife is one of those few lucky people who got pregnant on her honeymoon. Absolutely positively. Not before, but on her honeymoon. And there were family members who counted the days and so on, and they were satisfied that, yeah, no sex before marriage. This was on the honeymoon. So I was married, but quickly became a father. Turning point. I did not get a long period of just being married to my lovely wife before she was a mother and I was a father, and we had a child to raise. Turning point. Uh, Turning points, turning points. There's a lot of them. I don't know. I'm just recalling ones I had, and they continue to today. Um, One time I decided to hell with working for the man, and I would just be a consultant. I'd had some money stocked away, so I gave up the steady paycheck to figure I can find my own work, and I was successful in doing so. There was a turning point. Had I not been successful, I would have had to scramble around. There were times when I've lent people money and they didn't pay me back, and I had to scramble to pay that loan off or something I guaranteed. Turning point. I don't like lending money anymore. Uh, Turning points. About recent turning points. Um, Recent turning points. Uh, I think a lot of times I am an assistant for people and try to encourage a turning point. Like my father encouraged me with that electrical engineering sort of laboratory kit when I was 8, 9, 10. I try to provide things like that that uh, perhaps is a turning point for them, you know. My uncle, one of my uncles had been in the military in Germany, in the occupation forces of Germany after World War II. And he was an adjutant or whatever you call it to a colonel of the whole bunch of people. And he would drive his Jeep, and the colonel knew how to fly a plane. And so he and the colonel would fly around in this little plane all the time. They would just, the colonel liked to fly, and so they would take a plane and fly over Germany. And my uncle got fascinated with flying, the whole thing, and he really wanted to do it. So later in life, I decided that I would get a pilot's license. Um, I'm an amateur radio operator, and I have an extra class license, which is the highest class that you can get. And I don't know why I got that, except it was credentials, like resume. Well, I can do it, and I did. I want to be a pilot, so I will. So I took pilot's training, and back and forth to the airport and flying around. And periodically, I would visit my uncle. And one day, when I was going to the airport, it occurred to me I'd been driving past a hobby shop, like every time I went out there. So one day, I just stopped and went in the hobby shop, and I bought a radio controlled kit airplane. It was a giant uh, a Cessna uh, 172, or a big, private but big plane, single engine plane. I bought a kit. So when I went to visit him, I gave him this kit, and I said, "Look, I don't know if you want to build it or can build it." As a kid, he used to build model planes, and we're out of balsa wood, and use the paper as the wing covering. It was like tissue paper. So I remember him doing that and launching these gliders out the back windows of the rental house we had, because it was 2 stories tall, and he could pitch them, and they flew. They flew. And anyway, I gave him this kit. I didn't know if he'd ever build it or not. He did. He got into it big time. And my son and I went up for the first maiden flight of his home built kit Cessna. He didn't fly it. Someone with experience in radio controlled airplanes did. But we saw it take off and land and fly around, and it was perfect. Okay. Well, after that, he built like 10 more models, and they were amazing. He was a carpenter all his life, house builder, and he could do amazing things. And these planes were all, I thought they were, you know, prize winners. He said no, that there were people who could do a lot better than he did. But nonetheless, it was a turning point for him. He had gotten retired, sitting watching television all day long. This was something that got him up, got him interested. He learned about engines and RC stuff. He learned about, he crafted his own missing pieces, all that stuff. He got him back using his hands and eyes, and it was a turning point for him. Turning points. Um, I don't know if you've looked back and saw what various turning points are. Some are minor, some are major. I always say when I met my future wife, that was a big turning point. The big turning point. I'll often say, had I not we not gotten married, I would probably be a homeless guy in Washington D.C., living in underground car garages. I've noticed when I'm in there, weird, that there are places up near the big fans that circulate air and so on. There are places, little shelves back in the concrete, that you could crawl back in there and set yourself up a nice little space, a bed in there, and it would be hidden. No one would see you, and you'd be safe, and security guards would never know you're there. And so I can envision myself, if the turning point had gone the other way, that's where I'd be hanging out. Homeless guy, no responsibilities, no nothing. And the whole marriage thing, I think of the Beatles song, "You're gonna carry that weight for a long time." You know that song? I had 4 children, heavy weight. What if I hadn't had 4 children? It's a real blessing now. At the time, it was hard. But 4 children, turning point. I got snipped after the fourth one. No more children. Wife would have had 6, but no more. I don't know. Life would have been different if I had 6 children. Talked to a guy the other day. His father he was one of 9, and his mother was one of 7 or something like that. And it was, lots and lots and lots. And that would be turning point. Turning point for your children, the fact that they had siblings, that that's a major factor on the thing. Time monuments are a different thing. Um, I Anything I put a lot of effort into is a time monument. When I was doing amateur radio stuff and I built my first transmitter or whatever, a time monument was the first time I had a contact into Europe on my wire antenna and my electrical magic that I had created in these boxes on my desk. That was magic, and it was a time monument. I remember that very clearly. I have thrown my being 4,000 miles, 5,000 miles across the Atlantic to a person living in another country, and we have communicated in real time. It's entirely different global time. He's at some other thing. Talking into South Africa, talking to a farmer on a farm in South Africa. Time monument. I remember that. I remember everything about it. You know, I had the magic ability to do that, and it builds into the magic sometimes that I think. There are things that are magical, and to me that is still magical. That you can throw your voice across the globe with electricity. You know. Anyway, this is about monuments and turning points. And turning points, there actually can be a lot of them. Uh, we After living in 25 years for the same place, I upped and moved us, and that was a major turning point. I was too old to be moving, but I did anyway. and things are different. They just are. The path has been different. Hard on my wife, but it's turning out to be a good place for her. And that was part of the reason I left, and part of the reason I moved was to get out of the political crap of Washington, D.C. The atmosphere there was toxic. If there's environmental pollution, one of them is the political workaholic intensity. Energy space is filled with energy and intensity of crazy people working their ass off for the government and themselves and trying to make a living, and it's just crazy. People on cars, and I had to make a turning point there. I could not continue on that path, so I jagged and I jigged, and I moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, and it's an okay place. I do what I always do. Occupy myself with hands and eyes. Turning point. Turning point. I wish I'd learned how to play guitar better. That you can do anything you want to do, but you got to put effort into it. And apparently, I didn't want to do it that much because I had other things I think I had to do. I feel like I have to do other things like repair cars and you know, insulate the house so my energy bill's not that high. Anyway, turning points, monuments, time monuments. I want to call them time monuments. They are survey points. You can find them if you look around along roads. They're there, and they're helpful for a new survey crew. Um, Monuments, of course, monuments would come to mind. You think of grave monuments, and eventually there'll be a monument somewhere at some time for me and everybody I've ever known. That's another kind of monument. Interesting, we still do that. Um, I don't know, it's ritual society, ritual Christian, I guess, ritual. Anyway, enough for today. Today is the 15th of March, and I'm headed back outside for some more dirt. But this is episode whatever, and I will get it posted. That's it for today. Uncle Ron and stuff. I don't think anybody cares.